This is day 6 of the January 91 7-day retreat in Springwater. Here are some of the new questions or statements. Everything I do or think, I have found to be self-centered. And I have done or could do anything. You seem to only focus on the negative things in us. And that makes us feel we are bad or worse. Why aren't we silent with each other more often, not just in retreat? Do we have a choice not to go with the momentum of habit, but to be aware? Can awareness be learned? Does its happening facilitate more happenings of awareness, that is? Does the work we're doing here have any effect on the state of this world, with its horrendous wars and the spread of feelings of doom? And then a question we have never taken up yet, which came earlier in the retreat, I'll read it again. You said that we think that there is a me that thinks. I deeply feel that my thoughts come from me. Can you say some more about that? I don't remember ever having thought that we're really bad human beings, evil. Or some of us are bad and evil, and others are not. Others are good or better. I've never thought that way, that I can remember. But what is very clear is that we're heavily deluded. Due to the fact that this brain and whatever goes with it throughout the organism allows that delusion to happen. To think of ourselves and each other as separate entities. And to create, through image and remembrance, enemies versus my friends. And if there's any meaning or sense to this work, it is to begin to question how we think and imagine and take that for real. Acting as though our thoughts and images were real, our thoughts about ourselves and each other. And to see the almost instantaneous connection throughout this organism of thought with emotion, strong emotion, and mobilization of muscular power and other power. To strike out or run away from what appears to be threatening. Due to image and remembrance, I'm not talking about a real danger. Someone coming at one with a club. Whether this work of looking into ourselves, sitting quietly or walking quietly, and not just in retreat, but in our daily relationship, looking within and seeing what is operating, how it is operating, impartially, not already impressing a mold or a model upon our way of interpreting what is happening, but seeing it innocently, as it were. If there's any meaning or sense to that, it is to free us from the power of illusions created in this brain and body. Not because we're bad or we want to be deluded. We're taught that we're individual entities, that we're good or bad. Who our enemies are, we are taught very early, very subtly maybe, or grossly. Through loose talk by parents who may not even mean to instill prejudice, it filters in to the growing child, who to respect, who to disrespect, and whom to ignore. Of course, as times are critical at all right now, I'm just wondering what little children feel about the Iraqians or the Arabs, or how have the cartoon accents changed from Russian to Arabic. Facial expressions, maybe the beards. I'm wondering what Benjamin, our grandson, is thinking about all of that. Because he's not free to think. He is free to think, but no one allows it. Everyone wants to shape, to indoctrinate, to make a child what, according to what one feels is one's just cause. I'm not saying that there may not be exceptional families, but families cannot prevent the impact of school, what is taught in school, the impact of commentators, TV news, which I've heard in this particular war are more controlled than they've ever been before. Newscasting or reporters not having access or whatever. Whether this work of really seeing into delusion and seeing that it is delusion, that it is image, and that image is not real, that it is memory, idea, what I am, what I have to protect in myself, what you are, what I hate in you, or how I make you into an enemy when you threaten what I feel is my integrity, which is my images, my ideas about myself. Seeing into that, does that have an effect upon the state of the world? And seeing does not just mean intellectual understanding, but a change in this process, in this structure. So it is not the overriding influence of our daily thoughts and actions. Allows something else to come into being, which is lovingness and compassion and intelligence in our relationship. Does that have an influence upon the war in Iraq? I don't know. Who knows? And is that in our mind that we do this in order to have an influence? I think then there's already not a complete, open, innocent awareness, which also sheds light on wanting to do something, wanting to have impact, wanting to change the world into a better world, which we've been trying for thousands of years. Last Christmas, with the euphoria of the Berlin Wall falling down or coming down, there was the thought, we have gotten someplace after all. And where are we today? What are we? What am I? Person says, I have a strong conviction that I am the thinker of my thoughts, that the thoughts come from me. What does one mean by that? And when the question is asked, what do you mean by that, or what does one mean by that, that question does not imply you shouldn't think that way, you're bad for thinking this way, or stupid or something. We want to understand each other and ourselves, and for that we ask questions, which can be interpreted as some sort of inquisition going on, to nail one in one's false thoughts or so. We've had that happen to us probably early on, and there's fear of being questioned. Also fear of where the questioning may lead, because we're attached to our structures of being an individual entity with free will, free choice. We're proud of our capacities, talents, intelligence, as though they were our property. And we're ashamed of our shortcomings, as though they were our fault. So when someone asks, what do you mean when you say the thoughts are coming from me? Then is the field open to look together? And not to stop when it gets scary or uncomfortable, shaky, but to continue questioning alone or together, or maybe not today, but take it up tomorrow again. There are thoughts. Everyone who's alive probably aware that there are thoughts in the mind, although it's interesting how people who come to retreat, maybe for first time, make the statement that they have many more thoughts in retreat than they have at home or in their daily life. Sometimes it's wondering whether one did the right thing in coming to retreat, since thoughts seem to be augmented. It's probably just becoming more aware of what goes on in this mind all the time, day and night, thoughts and stories. Images, pictures, scenarios, projections, remembrances. And in the center stage, I am, as the hero, the heroine, or the villain, villainess. The main part is me. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, then we can't look, then we can't continue looking, particularly if we think it's wrong. And we'll start to argue or defend. people every once in a while saying, I've found that there's self-center in everything I say and do. And someone could say, well, you have now indoctrinated us thoroughly to think that way. I don't think those people who say that out of indoctrination, because it's usually with a certain sense of shock, amazement, and it's a discovery. So what do we mean when we say the thoughts come from me? Does one mean that ever-present self-center that one feels is in the middle of our consciousness? We perceive from a center. That's how we feel. And that center is what we know something is that we perceive, how we interpret it. First we label it, interpret it, we react to it, and then take action of either going toward it or away from it. Well, putting it simply. And the feeling is that there is something within someone who is doing all of that. Our language alone, our language has had a profound impact on our way of thinking about ourselves, because we always say, I think, I do, I breathe. We say, I'm breathing. But in silent listening, if one doesn't make it into a practice, because then it becomes, I have to do this practice, I have to follow my breathing, and there's will involved, which is already strengthening the sense of me. But when that is not there, and there's just experiencing of this, whatever it is, a whole movement of the body, with an incoming breathing and outgoing breathing, one may discover to one's amazement, again, there's no one doing it. It's just happening. Am I beating my heart? Am I pumping the blood through the body? We don't say that, do we? It's beating. One can feel the pulsation. Am I controlling the immune system, fighting incoming bacteria? We don't say that. We don't go that far. Until recently, we didn't even know about that system. And it has been operating for millions of years without anyone ever thinking, it's mine or I'm doing it. It's just happening in an unfathomable way. The brain is recording remembrances, experiences that are happening as remembrance. It's doing this in the little child long before the child even says I or thinks I in me. The brain is recording impressions, pleasurable ones, dangerous ones. It's beginning to associate a name with this body. And then the language emerging, this is me, I'm John, I'm Toni. Of course, we're told constantly by our surrounding friends, relatives, brothers, sisters, parents, what we're like. Cute, or maybe not told that we're cute. Ben once asked, why does everybody say that Adi is cute? Am I cute? I felt jealous of that. Because with saying you're cute, there goes a smile and a warmth directed toward the child. Not just by parents, but in the supermarket or in the doctor's office. Isn't she cute? And sort of bending toward her. And he stands there, kind of stiff. And then he wants to be looked at too. I remember the changeover from walking and going to the playground with him, when everything was still a discovery and a pleasure to touch and feel. I've often mentioned once we took a walk on a very hot day, sunny, and on the path was a little grove of trees, small. It was suburban development, just for a little child. And he walked into that shade, and then he walked out, and he walked back in, and he walked back out. Or there came a little hill, and he suddenly walked fast, almost fell. So he climbed up that little incline again and down again, feeling something. Or the time we walked on an icy night, snowy, and there was a lantern and spreading a very fairy-like circle of light on the ice underneath, and he sat down on that. He invited me to. He said, "Let's sit down for a while." I kept standing. And then a change occurred. Going to the playground, "Grandma, watch me." And before, whereas he was just very much into gymnastics and swinging and climbing, now it was a divided thing. It was for the sake of my watching him. And the demand was constant, became almost an annoyance. Having to do this, it became very needy of being seen, being watched, admired, particularly when we went to the playground with his little sister and him, Adi and Ben. I did something with her that inevitably came the call, "Grandma, watch me." And Adrian, not any different. I've told it once too, holding her in the arm. She was already not a baby anymore, but loved to be cuddled and cradled. And Ben came to ask something, came to the table where I was sitting holding her, and I was talking to him, and she took my face with her two hands and snapped it toward her again. "Watch me, be with me." Have we outgrown that? So something evolved or developed in the child from just experiencing and living with senses open and the joy of it, or crying when falling down and then getting up again and forgetting all about it, to that this is happening to someone, to me, and that I am someone who is either admired or not loved, and wanting more of the one and less of the other. And with all that is said about us, parents, grandparents, teachers, we develop this idea of what we are. And it is not a single idea. We went into that in a group meeting. It's a multiplicity of images, not just one. And they're constantly adding to them. Or the brain is, because there's no doer of that. It happens, and it can be observed to happen. One person tells me, the moment something happens, I already want to be something to whom this has happened, or make something of it, become somebody. This is what you begin to observe if you do this. This observing what happens in the mind and not bringing a model to it. And no one is asked to believe this and say this is how we operate. It only has any kind of meaning and significance and significant action if it's discovered for oneself. talking and discussing and dialoguing may help in this discovery. But it can only happen here in oneself. No one else can do it for one. And when it happens, it's always an amazement that then one sees the real difference between intellectual understanding and a direct discovery or insight, call it what you will. When that insight doesn't take place, the clarity and sharpness of intellectual understanding masquerades for insight. We don't know any better. Often people say, well, how do you know that you have an insight? You can't know it. It's not knowable. It happens. And the question, well, are you deceiving yourself, is a good question to ask oneself. Leave it open if it's not clear. Or if it's clear, there may already be the idea cropping up, I'm one who has an insight, which is becoming someone again, adding a new image to which there is attachment. It's another very important factor in this. Attachment, meaning. Gleaning energies, satisfying one or fearful ones, from thinking about oneself as this or that, famous, good, talented, not capable, incompetent. All of these images give energies of some sort or another, or drain energies. But they all provide a feeling of home. This is me. This is what I am. And bind energies. They can generate energies, but the energy of not having any idea about oneself, of no center in the perception, that whole energy is cut up, fragmented in thinking about me. It's not the same energy as wholeness, no division, no center stage. But it's very tricky, very deceiving, because thinking about myself as being tremendous can generate energies which validate the image, because it has bodily feelings. Feeling of pride or happiness or envy or jealousy. I have all of those, we think. Me, that's what me is, all of these feelings. But if there is a questioning, what is this whole process, and observing it patiently and untiringly, undauntedly, by the pain that some of these insights bring, some of these discoveries, then one will realize there is no center from which all of this comes. It comes from memory. And memory is not just thought, but it's programmed into the whole body. The whole body remembers pleasure and pain and helps in projecting this conviction that there is a me who has that pleasure and suffers that pain. And thought can project an image of myself having more pleasure, like a movie, like a video. There's this process going on in the brain. One can see oneself at a pleasurable place with a person, with another person having pleasure together. And the whole body is excited, stimulated by it, which gives validity to imagery. Because after all, I can feel it. I can feel it in my guts, we say. Guts are very responsive to our thoughts. And if attention isn't there, the thought may have eluded us, but the gut feeling is there. That's why often people say, why do you talk so much about thoughts? I just have feelings. But they go together, they are wedded. Not all verbal thoughts, because remembrances were laid down in our early childhood when we didn't have language yet. But picture, remember, taste, smells, and the feelings that go with them. Memory and feeling are inseparable. And not just one always causing the other, but feelings also cause more memories or more thoughts about me and the other. This is all presented not to indoctrinate, but to test out for oneself. To find out by looking within. And it happens easiest when one sits still. But it's not the only time for discovering. In relating to each other, hosts of reactions come up, which may not come up in quiet sitting. So then can they be observed without immediately condemning, accepting, judging, rejecting, justifying or rationalizing, constantly building up complications around simple reactions. So coming back to the original question, I feel that the thoughts are coming from me. But you say that the thinker, in quotation marks, is a thought itself, is itself a thought. This is presented as a thing to find out whether this is so. Language says I think, and I think means there's a thinker who thinks. But in sitting with this, the hosts of thoughts that come up and go and come up and go, where do they come from? If one immediately jumps in and says, from the thinker, from me, isn't that thought? A quick thought? A quick assumption which is thought? When I ask who is having this experience of a rough throat and doing this, do I say there's an experiencer or there's a doer? That's a thought. The fact is, that's the fact. To say, I have this experience, I am the experiencer of it, and I am the doer of the clearing of the throat. That's thinking, isn't it? Maybe I shouldn't say it's thinking, isn't it? I should say, is that thinking? So it doesn't put that extra, what may sound as trying to convince people in it. But if one says, no, there is a thinker, then can one find the thinker? Look for the thinker, the doer, the breather, the experiencer? Because one can say, well, it's just all me. But what is this me? Beside all the reactions, counter-reactions, sensations, and almost an infinite storage of memories, which is not just passively there, but it is active. Memories and programs, the way we've been trained to think, to react. Passive and active, both. Some of it very far, it seems, removed from awareness. So automatic, we're so habituated, so used to it, that we wouldn't even think of questioning it. But the amazing thing about awareness which comes into being is that in its transparency, things show up. Old programs or deep programs reveal themselves, of thinking in a certain way about oneself, of walking in a certain way, of facial gestures or body movements, which may not flow naturally the way they did when we were very little, with no inhibiting thoughts, but they may reveal thoughts in them. A tense gesture, a tense holding of the fist, or sometimes people say they find they're grinding their teeth. In becoming aware of it and watching it impartially, non-judgmentally, sort of thoughts may bubble out of it like, I must, I have to, I shouldn't, which hold the body in certain tensions. This deep attachment that we mentioned to the idea of myself, what I am, even if it is that I feel miserable, there's still attachment. Can that be questioned, watched, wondered about? People do wonder about it, and they say, if I see at a moment of clarity what misery or imprisonment all these ideas about myself bring, why don't I let go of them? Why do I persist in them? Well, it's a good question, and if the question is powerful, not just sort of rhetorical, then one will observe why one persists and find out more and more and more about how we live in attachment. Attachment is something that imprisons us, separates us from others, or causes great difficulty in our relationship. It's interesting that in this retreat, which for so many people started with so much heaviness and gloom, feelings of gloom, depressiveness about the war, the destruction and the potential destruction, not one person mentioned fear of dying, fear of death, which usually comes up in a retreat, earlier or later. Just this morning I wondered about that. Whether the intense concern of all of us here with our fear of living has sort of paled the fear of dying. Wondering how we're living and how we're going to continue living with this possible spread of the war, or the war as it already is. All the weapons, all the armament that exists throughout the world, and more people arming themselves. Can we look at our own armament, our own defense systems? We too shoot missiles at each other, or try to intercept missiles coming from others through our defenses. And we do, at the snap of a finger, create an enemy and then persist in sustaining this enmity through thought and not communicating with each other. Because if we begin to communicate with each other, some imagery may break down that has upheld this thought of enmity or animosity or adversariness. It's come up a lot in meetings, this creation of enemies. And whether in our daily relationship with each other we can watch that and wonder if we have to create any enemies. Not it's bad, we shouldn't, this old-fashioned moralistic controlling ourselves, but an open inquiry and looking. And learning how enemies are created. We have to understand that. We have to go through it with open eyes and ears and heart. See when it happens, how it happens, in ourselves, with each other, and among others. And can we get together and discuss it, face it? And in between, before or after, whenever, also sit silently with each other? Because, as some people have mentioned, in that silent sitting together, a lot of barriers break down. Between you and me. That is, if the silent sitting isn't just nourishing my images of you and what you did to me, and then working oneself up silently. The question of why talk about so many negative things about us. The word negative is already loaded. We talk about what binds us and divides us and causes sorrow. In seeing that, there's nothing negative or positive. There's only what is, and it's the sun streaming through the window. Breathing, sounds. Maybe a thought about oneself. What is that? What are we? What am I? What are you? When there's just listening and looking and not knowing. Silence. we will end here for today.